Imagine this for a second. You're a decorated police brigadier, a 30-year veteran, sitting under the harsh lights of a judicial inquiry. Suddenly, every decision you've made, every relationship, every single private message is public record, and it's all being picked apart by some very serious lawyers. Well, that was the reality for Brigadier Rachel Matjeng, and her testimony reveals this incredible, tangled web of duty, love, and a very high-stakes contract. So let's dive in and untangle this.
And boom, right from the get-go, the Commission's chairperson just lays it all out there with this one razor-sharp question. It really cuts to the absolute heart of the matter, doesn't it? Is this a story of a wild coincidence, or is it a pretty clear-cut case of a conflict of interest?
So, where does a story like this even unfold? Well, we're inside a high-stakes Commission of Inquiry, which is basically putting a senior police officer's entire professional life right under the microscope.
Yeah, the testimony we're breaking down all happened at the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into Criminality, Political Interference, and Corruption. The whole reason this thing exists is to investigate situations exactly like this one.
All right, so let's meet the two main players at the center of this story. Because really, it's their intertwined lives, both professional and personal, that this whole inquiry is all about. So, on one side, you've got Brigadier Rachel Matjeng. We're talking about a career police officer. She joined way back in 1994 and has been steadily climbing the ladder ever since. And at the time all this went down, she was in a pretty big role as the section head for quality management and forensic services. And on the other side of this whole thing, we have a businessman, Mr. Matlala, who also goes by the nickname Cat. Now, he owns a few companies, but the one you need to remember, the one that puts him right in the middle of this inquiry, is called Medicare 24. The link between this high-ranking police officer and this private businessman, well, it all boils down to one thing: a very lucrative and actually a critically important police contract.
Now, the contract was for something called medical surveillance. And this is not your standard annual checkup, okay? We're talking about really specialized health monitoring for police officers working in forensics. You know, people who are around hazardous chemicals, biological agents, and all kinds of other dangers on the job. It's a super important service to keep them safe.
And you really got to pay attention to the timing here. So the old provider's contract runs out in March. Then, just a couple of months later, in June, the new contract goes to Medicare 24. That's Mr. Matlala's company. And here's the kicker. Brigadier Matjeng's department was the official end user, which basically put her in charge of managing that whole relationship.
And this is where things start to get really complicated, because the relationship between the brigadier and the new contractor wasn't just professional. No, not even close.
I mean, in her own sworn statement, Brigadier Matjeng confirmed it herself. This wasn't some new thing. She and Mr. Matlala had been in a romantic relationship since 2017. She called it an on and off cycle that was very much on right up until he was arrested for something totally separate. So yeah, this was not just a casual acquaintance.
So this brings us to the absolute core of the conflict, right? You've got two completely different stories. On one hand, Matjeng's defense is that she was totally transparent. She claims she told her supervisor about the relationship and even offered to step away from it all. But the commission? They saw a very different picture. A senior officer directly in charge of her romantic partner's contract, with the timing of her sudden deep involvement looking, well, incredibly suspicious.
Of course, the inquiry didn't just have to take her word for it. Oh no, they had evidence. They had private WhatsApp messages between the two of them that seemed to make those lines between personal and professional even blurrier.
I mean, take this message. From the Brigadier to Mr. Matlala. She's telling him to meet another police general, who she just calls JK, at the same spot. It just sounds kind of secretive, right?
So when they pushed her on it, what was her explanation? Pretty simple. It's private. She basically said she couldn't elaborate on what was, in her own words, just a social relation between friends.
But here's the thing. Their chats weren't all just social. She also testified they used WhatsApp to talk about serious, official business. They were bypassing all the formal channels to talk about everything from the police service being late on payments to fixing incorrect medical bills for officers.
So you can see how this pattern of informal chats and blurry lines led the commission to its final and, honestly, its most skeptical line of questioning, one that really challenged the brigadier's entire story.
The commission's skepticism really focused on one key number: 9. 9 months. For 9 whole months, Matjeng was in her role as section head, but the old company was still the one providing the service.
And that brought up the commission's biggest, most pointed question.
How could she be, and this is her own words, only minimally involved with the last company, but then suddenly become so actively involved the second her romantic partner's company gets the contract? Her claim that she only figured out her full duties in March, right before the switch, was met with some serious doubt.
Yeah, the commission just was not buying it. Not at all. Her testimony left all these huge questions just hanging in the air. Was it really a coincidence that she got so hands-on right when her partner's company won the bid? And why on earth was an official police meeting held at his other private company? Her explanations just didn't seem to hold up against their skepticism.
In the end, this whole case leaves us with a really fundamental and pretty challenging question. It forces you to ask, when the world of public duty and private affection smash into each other, can you ever really draw a clear line? And maybe more importantly, who gets to decide where that line even is?